All right, now, I spent considerable time over the last month on establishing some of the reasons why the Song of Songs is in the Bible. Can anybody tell me some of the things, high points that we have discussed? It got in the canon for one very obvious reason that we concluded after a 3-week study. Yes. It promotes monogamy. And why was that a big deal? So they put it in the canon because it promoted monogamy? Why is that a big deal? Why shouldn't that have been just an obvious thing that wasn't particularly in its favor? It was very much in its favor. Why? Yes, because polygamy was the norm, and monogamy was unusual. And we said monogamy was unusual and even undesirable in their culture. What were the reasons that polygamy was desirable and monogamy was undesirable? What were some of the reasons? Why did they want to multiply? Yes, for one basic national reason was they needed enough men to have huge armies. The people who had the most men had the empire. What were some other reasons? Of course, you can't just survive with an army. What else? Workers for what kinds of things? You needed enough workers, first of all, to, in an agrarian culture, keep that food supply up. Remember again, this was actually an age in history when there weren't enough people. They couldn't keep the land worked without enough people. They needed enough people to work those fields, to clear the mountain land, to build the cities. You see, you can't have people building cities if they don't have food. Somebody's got to build those huge walls. You can't have fortified cities, and you can't dig wells, and you can't have cisterns, because if you're doing that, you're not working the fields, and if you're not working the fields without refrigeration, you're going to starve. So you have to have enough people to provide food for everybody while others do other kinds of work. They needed people. And because of the constant war, what was the problem of the ratio between the sexes? You had a lot more women than men. Ratio appears to have been about 4-to-1 in the period of the judges. And as a result, what are you likely to have? You're either going to have a lot of women starving to death, or what? Or you're going to have polygamy, where every woman has a wife, every woman bears children, and so forth, right? And polygamy was considered desirable. Why did monogamy, this is all review, why did monogamy become something acceptable in the age of Solomon? Not even in the age of David, but in the age of Solomon. Solomon, with all these wives and concubines, why in his time did monogamy become acceptable and desirable again? Well, what does peace have to do with it? Yeah. The ratio is normalized. There were enough men. This only takes 15 years to do, right? Why does it only take 15 years? Yeah, because when they're 15, what are they? They're married and having children. So it only takes 15 years before you can start getting the generational change that equalizes the sexes and makes possible monogamous marriages without endangering your existence. Okay? So monogamy came with the age of peace. They had enough wealth flowing in that they didn't have to work the land every moment to have food. Why? Because at that time they had the men. The Egyptians didn't have the men. The Mesopotamian Empire didn't have the men. Palestine had the men. So they had the empire. Therefore what? Therefore, the wealth was flowing to them. They didn't have to have a large proportion of people working the land. Okay? Of course, once they lost the empire and became subservient again, what happened? They started having polygamy again, of course. Why are there so few laws about divorce in the Old Testament? And the only real discussion of divorce is in Nehemiah and Malachi. Well, a divorced woman was a dead woman. But why did they not have very much in the way of discussion about divorce? Throughout most of the Old Testament, nobody asked you why you got divorced, or if you got divorced. Why? Nobody got divorced. If that relationship didn't work out, then what? There was always another wife, and this wife had what? She had her children and her household to worry about, and that was that. Yeah? So, where you have polygamy, catch it? Where you have polygamy, of course you don't have divorce. That's why it's hardly ever discussed. The few laws that there are not only scarce but late. And when they went back in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah to monogamous marriages, then they had divorce again and it became an issue. All right? So, later on, polygamy became a problem again. And that's why later on, they liked Song of Solomon, because it was still monogamy. Right? Now, I jotted down some notes from various sources, things that are characteristic of the song that are interesting and give us some idea about some other reasons why it's in the canon and its role and function and how we're supposed to view it today. All right, everyone who's ever read the Song of Songs knows why it's called the Song of Songs, right? It's full of rich imagery, isn't it? It's clearly not prose. Does anybody remember the definition of poetry that I've given here several times? That's very good. Those aren't the words I chose, but that's the meaning. Yeah. Poetry is a richness of meaning in an economy of words. And that economy is achieved by the use of a number of standard literary devices such as, and then I list them all, and you could think of what they are. So it's a richness of meaning in a, what'd you say, terseness? I like that. In a terseness of words, yeah. And of course, that is the case with the Song of Songs. It means several things at once. What does this line mean? Well, it actually means more than one thing at a time, and the author intended it to mean more than one thing at a time. So you notice right away the richness of the symbolism, the extreme richness of the symbolism, that the poetry is so dense that at times we're just lost without unraveling some of the possible meanings. Modern readers sometimes get the feeling, I don't know where I am here, I'm at sea. I don't know what any of this has to do with anything. See? That's the problem with poetry becoming too dense. Now, another thing is that it's the only book where all the words are in the mouths of a speaker. It's the only book in the Bible, it's very unusual, where all the words are in the mouths of a speaker. And what kind of speech are we reading when we read Song of Solomon? What kind of speech is it? When you're speaking a kind of speech always. Who's the speaker speaking to? Who is the speaker speaking to? It's 142 verses. I'm sure you've read them all. Did everybody here has had a chance to read the 142 verses? What kind of speech is it? Would you call it dialogue? If she's speaking to whom? To the maidens, yes, or to the beloved, yes. I would say so, except that it's not technically correct. Who's she really speaking to? Well, most of the time, she's not speaking to the reader or to the beloved or to the chorus. Who's she speaking to? Herself. Much of the book is monologue, and that's very interesting and unusual. She's speaking to herself, thinking about the beloved, her relationship to the beloved, and so forth. Yeah, there is some dialogue, but it's mostly monologue. Frequent repetition. Well, we see frequent repetition of themes elsewhere, but frequent repetition here is most marked and rather intricate. It's because it's a chiasm and the various parts of the chiasm relate to each other that there's the kind of cross-repetition that there is. It's complicated. It's not random repetition. All right? And now I just said that it's a chiasm. And it's a chiasm, therefore there is no movement to a conclusion. It's not a drama. You end up where? What? Where you started. Because a chiasm brings you to the high point and back around. In fact, a chiasm we say is an X. It would be more properly described as a circle, because this is a cycle of songs. Yeah. So it is a circular thing. You end where you begin. Part 1 and Part 8 are the same place. You come back to the same wording, the same themes in Part 8 that you had in Part 1. You end where you began. All right? And of course, where do we find the meaning in a chiasm? In the center. Yeah. Do you know what verses are the center? Did anybody look at the chiasm that was printed in the Sabbath School Quarterly? What verses are the center? Well, if there are 8 parts, which parts would be the high point? 4 and 5, yes. 4 and 5 are these verses. Part 4 is Song chapter 4, verse 16. That's part 4. As in any chiasm, it's going to be paralleled by its parallel part. Its parallel part is part 5. Part 5 is 5, verse 1. 5, verse 1. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden. Let its fragrance be wafted abroad. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits. That's she speaking. He says, I come to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gather my myrrh and my spice. I eat my honeycomb with my honey. I drink my wine and my milk. Eat, O friends, and drink. Drink deeply, O lovers. Well, we'll dull the poetry down with exegesis later. All right. It's early poetry. It's at a stage where the imagery is not standardized. Right? Circumcise your heart. That's an image. Is it a particularly original one? Why? Well, in the Bible, it goes from Moses to Revelation, yeah, it's Deuteronomic language, right? By the time it's standardized in Deuteronomy, it's 800 years old. It's an image, but what would you say about it? It's a cliched image, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. But the imagery in Song of Songs is not cliched. It's original. This is still fresh. This is new. These images here had not been standardized. In fact, you could say that it's unrefined. Some of them work better than others. Some of them are very nice, and others are kind of silly. I mean, if you said to the person you love, you have beautiful legs. They look like alabaster pillars. How would that go over? I mean, if you said it with all sincerity and without smiling, that might not be considered the best image you could come up with. Yes. So, but the imagery is not standardized. Okay. You notice, unless you're reading Song of Songs at 11:30 at night and you're half asleep, you notice that the role of nature is emphatically present in Song of Songs. This has something to do with what the song's all about. Nature reflects what's going on between the two lovers. How it's going with them is reflected in nature. If it's going well, what's happening? If the love relationship is going well, what's happening in nature? Everything's blooming. Everything's coming up roses. There's a good cliche. Everything is birthing. When they're separated, when the relationship is not going well, what's happening in the song? Things are dying. There is not birth and fertility in nature. The relationship is a reflection of nature, and nature is a reflection of the relationship. Now that should give you some hints right away. All right. Geography. The geography is not Judah, and the geography isn't even Israel. The geography is everything from Egypt to Syria. It's not a distinctly Judean or Israelite song. It's a what? Properly stated, it's a what? Lebanon is there. Syria is there. Moab, Ammon, Gilead are there. Edom is there. Egypt is there. The spice trade in Arabia and Africa and India is there. Okay? So it's a what? Well, yes, it's cosmic because it includes all the, reading Genesis 10, it includes all the what? All the table of nations. The known world is included in the song. Richard, when you get a song that includes the whole of the known world, and where the actions of the lovers have to do with nature, what kind of a song do you have? What? Well, yes, you have the Song of Songs because it's mythic in its proportions. All right? Now, this is interesting. Get this. We're going to have to explain this. The song appears, I'm underlining appears, the song appears to be purely secular. There is no mention of God, apparently. What on earth could that mean? And of course, what question does it raise again? Why is it in the canon if there's not even one mention of God? The song appears to be secular. Anybody want to tackle that? Oh, it goes without saying. That's a good possible answer. Maybe it's a given. God is the source of all love. They knew that. Therefore, doesn't have to be mentioned or stated. What's the other book that doesn't mention God at all? Esther. Yeah. Right. That's another long story. All right. There's some technical things having to do with the Hebrew that are interesting here. I on E, sh instead of a share. Hapax legomena. Does anybody remember what hapax are? There are an amazing 49 of them in 117 verses. Yeah, words that appear only once in the Bible. 49 of them in 117 verses. Most of them technical terms. Most of them technical terms. Derived from what? That's going to tell us a lot. Where do all these words that never appear anywhere else in the Bible come from? What is their background? What do I mean, what is their background? If they only appear once, their background is Song of Songs, right? No. If we have a hapax, meaning it appears only once in the Bible, does that mean that's the only thing we know about that word? No, why? Ugaritic. That was a good one to pick on. What are some others? Arabic? Yeah. Ugaritic, Arabic. Aramaic, yes. Aramaic, sure. Aramaic. What else? What's the language of Babylon? What did Daniel speak every day? Akkadian. Akkadian, Ugaritic, Aramaic, Arabic. Yeah. Not just the cognate languages, though, Richard. There's a book this thick on non-biblical, biblical period Hebrew. Because remember, you're dealing with hundreds, close to thousands of inscriptions outside the Bible. Yeah. That gives us some background to these ideas. But we want to know, where did these words come from? They come from the technical language of the cult of ancient Canaan. What do I mean by the cult? I mean that part of the religion which is what? Sacrifices, ceremonies, rituals. Yes. Yes, sacrifices, ceremonies, rituals. There's unusual syntax that is unlike biblical Hebrew or biblical Aramaic. This unusual wording is probably accounted for by the fact that the Song of Solomon is derived from the cult of ancient Canaan. The cult of ancient Canaan. All right. Now then, there's another obvious one. The subject of erotic love is treated only in the Song of Songs. Well, it's mentioned in lots of places, but this is the subject here. All right then. With all of this said, what can we say about the song? What can we say about its origin and its intention? What have you derived from this so far? What have you gathered from what I've said so far? What? It was borrowed. Borrowed is a good word. But they never borrowed anything wholesale, did they? You couldn't get the Baal myth out of Psalm 24, even though the Baal epic is what's being quoted, right? What did they do when they borrowed? They cleaned up, yes. Well, borrowed. Who were the characters in this sort of song originally? The priest and priestess, yes. But the priest and priestess were only doing what? They were standing in for, yes, the gods and goddesses. Okay. What god and goddess comes to mind immediately? Baal and Ishtar. Yeah. Ishtar. Yeah. Baal and Ishtar come to mind immediately. Why? Because they were husband and wife? Because they were brother and sister? Because when they married, what happened? When they got married, as they did twice a year, what happened? Life came into nature. I said, when they got married, as they did twice a year. Remember, everything was cycles in the ancient world, right? Cycles, cycles, cycles. For you who haven't heard this before, they didn't have a timeline. We draw time like that, right? Because we're moving through time, and as we move along, we get further away from where we started, right? They didn't have timelines. What did they have? They had time circles, yes. Time cycles which brought you around to what? The end was the beginning. There's one obvious time cycle right in the song itself. How many parts does it have? 8. So what does that tell you? But 8 is 7. 8 is 7. For 7 transgressions and for 8 is 7. Why? Well, yes, but what are you celebrating? Yeah, but what is it? It's a week. Because what did they do on these weekly feasts? They started on the Sabbath. The feast continued throughout the week, and what? It ended on the Sabbath. Every weekly festival had how many parts? 8. Yes. Okay. That gives you a hint. Now the Canaanites celebrated the harvest, of course. The harvest is the beginning or the end of the cycle. The end. Oh, suckered into that so badly. I can forgive Henry, but not you. What have we just said? The end is the beginning. And is that so in ancient Palestine? They had 12 months, and they had 2 7-month periods. Because 7 is the complete number, right? How did they have 12 months and get 2 7-month periods out of 12 months? Because month 7 in the one cycle was month 1 in the other cycle. When was the New Year's Day? When was New Year's Day? There were 2 of them. Depends on whether you're in Israel or Judah, and in which century you're asking. That's a complicated story. The point is that New Year's Day came when? It came in March or April, or it came in October, November. Why did they have 2 New Year's Days? There were 2 harvests. Which was which, do you know? What 2 harvests were they? The grain harvest, the cereal harvest we sometimes call it, that's barley and wheat and flax. What's the other one? The vintage harvest, yes. What's that? That's the fruit. The grain is the spring. The grain is the spring harvest, and the vintage harvest is the fall in Palestine. Okay. So that when you were ingathering one harvest, what was going on with the other? You were sowing or pruning The word to prune and the word to sing are the same word in Hebrew. Because what? The time of dressing up the vineyards and getting them started is the time of what? Singing. Why are they singing? Because they have just brought in what? The harvest. Now the Canaanites celebrated both the spring and the fall as the ending and the beginning. This was the moment of two great fertility festivals in ancient Canaan. Now, of course, when Israel moved into this country, it happened that it inherited the same country with the same harvests. And so it had feasts at what days? The same days. Yeah. The very same days. And when the Canaanites were singing about the death of Baal, the marriage of Baal and his subsequent death, the Israelites couldn't do that, right? They didn't believe in that. But they did have those same festivals. Okay? Now at those festivals, interestingly, from as far back as we can trace, what did they sing? At the old Canaanite festivals in the spring and the fall, when the Canaanites sang about the marriage of Baal and Ishtar, as far back as even the Mishnah takes us, what were the Hebrews singing? Yeah, they were singing the Song of Songs. Yes, they were singing the Song of Songs. All right? So now if that's true, what can we say about the Song of Songs is secular? God is never mentioned. What can we say about that? Well, if it was sung at the annual feasts in the spring and the fall, and the Canaanites, when they sang these kinds of hymns, were singing about Baal and Ishtar, who might the Israelites have been singing about? First of all, let me ask you a question. Is this a series of marriage songs? Yes or no? Is this a series of marriage songs? My beloved is mine and I am his is the ancient declaration of marriage in the wedding ceremony. Always has been. It's the marriage covenant oath. Yes. This is a series of wedding songs. Now then, how long were these feasts? How long were these feasts? 8 days. Yeah. According to the Mishnah, they sang the parts on the various days. They sang the whole song on the beginning and ending Sabbaths. And when that harvest was over, they had to worry about the next harvest. And what were they hoping and praying for? What were they hoping and praying for? What did they have to have now? It's wonderful that the harvest is in and we had a great harvest. Now the next one is starting. What do we have to hope and pray for? A new fertility, right? They had to hope and pray. Well, rain is the same answer. They had to hope and pray for fertility. And of course, the early rain and the later rain were related to the two harvests. That's what they were there for. Because the germination of the two harvests. Yeah. And the water here is symbolic too, of course. So that as you brought in the harvest and you sang with happiness about the bounty of nature, what did you have to hope and pray for? That there would be, yes. And who will give that? God. Well, who is God? Yahweh? Yeah. Do you remember in Isaiah the famous vineyard song? Isaiah's vineyard song. Isaiah 5. If you took Hebrew prophets, you remember this. This is a major touchstone in the themes of Isaiah. If you haven't had the opportunity to take Hebrew prophets, if you've read the writings of Ellen White, then you've read this because Mrs. White quotes this again and again and again. She comes back to this song in Isaiah 5. It's quoted often in the New Testament. This is a touchstone. This is one of those passages that's basic. Let me sing for my beloved a love song concerning his vineyard. Now, if I had just started out with this saying, I'm reading a passage of Scripture, tell me where it is, you would have said what? This is from Song of Songs, yeah. Let me sing for my beloved a love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He digged it and cleared it of stones, and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it, and hewed out a wine vat in it, and he looked for it to yield grapes. But it yielded wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, by the way, there's the Kina rhythm, there's the same rhythm as in the Song of Songs, that's meant to be sung. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I'll tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge. What's the vineyard here anyway? I'll remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed. We could have translated that. It won't be sung over. And briars and thorns shall grow up. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain on it. There's the rain. Good. For the vineyard of Yahweh of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed, for righteousness, but a cry. That's a cry of violence there. Someone's being attacked. Right? Question. Who is the vineyard in the Song of Songs? The bride is the garden. The bride is herself the garden. That's one of its many meanings, but the bride is herself the garden. When she asks the groom to come into the garden, she's asking him to come to her. All right? Who is the vineyard here? Israel and Judah. Who is the beloved here? What? Yahweh himself, Yahweh of hosts. Yahweh himself is the beloved. In fact, Yahweh is Doth, Yahweh is beloved, is a standard Old Testament phrase. All right? What am I saying? What am I saying? Okay. Yes, it's really a tight syllogism. A equals C. Who's the beloved in Song of Songs? Primarily, originally, and especially. Who is the beloved? Not Solomon. Not Solomon. That misses the point. Who is the beloved? God. They would have said God, they would have said what? Yahweh. Yeah. Dodiyahu is a good Hebrew name that appears in the Old Testament. Dodiyahu. What does it mean? It means Yahweh is beloved. When it says that we're called to sing about one beloved of women, what's it talking about? It's talking about Yahweh. This is basic Old Testament stuff. And if you're acquainted with the Old Testament, you would know right away that my beloved in these songs is a standard phrase for God Himself. Why? Because in this song, God has the masculine role. Then who? This is the demythologizing of myth, Richard. The demythologizing of myth. That's the technical term for cleaning it up. Richard said, well, they cleaned it up. The demythologizing of myth. Some scholars would say the historicizing of myth. All right, so who is the woman? Israel is the woman, right? And the promised fertility is what? Is in fact a marriage between God and Israel. That's why the rabbis loved it. That was their other reason for including it in the canon. They said what? And they were right. It is what? It's not primarily about a husband and wife. I like the Sabbath School Quarterly's comments, but they're not what it was about originally. What's it about? It's the marriage between God and Israel. Well, now, what you said is an extension. The New Testament extends that. What? The marriage becomes what? Christ in the church, as opposed to Yahweh and Israel. Yes. Okay. Now then, what then about my point that this is a purely secular song, apparently, that God is never mentioned? Why is God never mentioned? Yes, because what? Because God is the beloved. God is the man that Israel is seeking after in the song. God is everywhere present in the song. So what can we say about it? What can we say about it being secular? What about? Yeah, so the very distinction is a modern one. It's not secular at all. If it comes out of the cult of ancient Israel, and it was used liturgically, and it was, in fact, we wouldn't call it, in this light, we wouldn't call it a love song at all. What would we call it? A hymn. Yeah. Or a series of hymns, more correctly. Antiphonal hymns. Antiphonal hymns used liturgically. Now, when were they used? When? What feasts? Are those feasts clear in your minds, or are they sort of hazy things there in the background? What are the two feasts, and when were they, and how were they celebrated? Let's start with the easy laws, Deuteronomy 16. The easy laws. If you want it simple and spiritual application without a lot of priestly complications, where are you going to go? Without a lot of liturgical complications, where are you going to go? You're going to go to Deuteronomy. If you want to know all the priestly details, where are you going to go? Yeah, go read Leviticus. All right. Yeah. Observe verse 1. Observe the month of Aviv to keep the Passover of Yahweh your God. For in the month of Aviv, Yahweh your God brought you out of Egypt by night, and you shall offer a Passover sacrifice to Yahweh your God from the flock of the herd at the place which Yahweh will choose to make his name dwell there. All right, don't offer the Passover sacrifice, verse 5, in any of your towns, but the place which Yahweh will choose. This is what's different between the priestly writings in Deuteronomy. Then we have in verse 9, you shall count 7 weeks. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time you first put the sickle into the standing grain. Then you shall keep the feast of weeks to Yahweh your God, with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as Yahweh your God blesses you. And you shall rejoice before Yahweh your God, and your son and your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, the Levite who is within your towns, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are among you, at the place which Yahweh your God will choose to make his name dwell there. What do you notice about this feast? It's called the Feast of Weeks here because you have to count forward 7 weeks. What do you notice about it here? What kind of a feast is this? What kind of a cycle are we in the 7 weeks between Passover and what kind of a cycle are we in? These 7 weeks are 7 weeks of harvest. Now, of course, we have to make a parallel between what? 7 days. What? 7 days, which makes the week. Then the 7 weeks, which completes the cycle between the beginning and ending of each of the 2 harvests. 7 weeks is a complete cycle. What else? What's a complete harvest cycle from beginning to end? 7 months. Yes. And the whole thing is capped by the sabbatical year system, which is what? 7 years. So let me ask you again, is there a year-day principle in the Bible? Somebody said there was. Is there? Well, yeah, there's a day, week, month, year parallelism principle in the Bible. That's the way they counted. Cycles were parallel to each other. Right? What are the people doing at this time? Is this a time of solemn affliction? Do you know that originally they kept the Day of Atonement as a feast in which they were to do what? All of these festivals, HAG, where they were to do what? They were to rejoice. Well, now what are you supposed to do now on the Day of Atonement? As you read, what? Fast and afflict your souls. Yes. How did the Day of Atonement get so dark in the priestly writing? When is P writing? When's he setting it all down? What's their situation? Once he gathered all these laws of Moses and written them and written his comments on them, what was it gathered for? What was it finally put in this form for? What event? Who can say? What event was it put into its current form for? Can you spell Hezekiah? Yeah. What was the fall celebration? Deuteronomy 16, beginning of verse 13. Deuteronomy 16, beginning in verse 13. You keep the Feast of Booths 7 days. When you make your ingathering from the threshing floor and winepress, you shall rejoice in your feast, and your son and your daughter, your manservant and maidservant, the Levite and the sojourner, the fatherless and the widow who are within your towns. For 7 days you shall keep the feast to Yahweh your God, at the place which Yahweh will choose, because Yahweh your God will bless you in all your produce and the work of your hands, so that you be altogether joyful. Note, what is the tone of both the spring and fall festivals? Naturally, what is it? It's joyful. It's joyful. So, the fall festival got to be somber. It got to be that the Day of Atonement was an awesome and frightening event. Why? After centuries of covenant violation, what? The Day of Atonement didn't seem to be the Day of Atonement anymore. It was what? The day of impending judgment. Yes. It became somber, and it still is to this day. Originally, it was a period of rejoicing. They were happy. Why? It was the time that God was making atonement. Bad news or good news? Good news. It was a time of rejoicing. A word that is used over and over again in the song. What ways can people show that they're rejoicing? What are some ways? Probably rejoicing people are not fasting. Okay? I'm never rejoicing when I'm fasting. Never. In fact, if I'm rejoicing, I'm what? I'm eating. And they were to eat. It was harvest time. There was plenty. What else? Singing and dancing. Look, the chorus here and the male and female actors aren't just standing saying, "My beloved is mine and I am his. Let us go out into the fields and rejoice together." Right? Oh, clap your hands. The voice of the turtle dove is heard in the land. We know, although we are descended from the Puritan wing of the church, we know that what was done at these feasts, what was done as part of these liturgies, what was automatic along with the eating and rejoicing, how were these liturgical details carried out? People were assigned roles, and they sang, and they what? And they danced. In fact, Deuteronomy says that if you don't rejoice, this is a terrible law here. It says if you don't rejoice in all the good things God has given you, if you aren't truly happy, then what? Then you're not obeying the law. And as a result, what will happen? God will bring on you the curses because you didn't rejoice. That's what Deuteronomy 28 says. And this Song of Songs was part of that rejoicing. So naturally, when do you think people got married in Israel? They never got married in August. Never married in February. When did they get married? April or May or October, November. At the time when the wedding song was sung between Yahweh and Israel. It's a little clearer today? Good, we're working on it. Thank you.